Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really going deep into a story that's just staggering. The miracle of the Andes.
That's right. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. It's a name many people know, but the details, the day-to-day reality of it, that's what we want to unpack.
Exactly. We've looked at the sources, and our goal here is to trace that timeline. You know, what happened between October and December 1972, the crash, the isolation, and the extreme choices they faced.
It all starts, tragically, on October 13th, 1972. You've got this chartered flight, 45 people on board. Many were young guys, a rugby team heading from Uruguay to Chile.
And then disaster strikes in the Andes, high mountains, terrible weather.
Precisely. The sources point to severe turbulence, really thick cloud cover. The plane was descending and, it clipped a mountain ridge.
Just clipped it.
Well, clip sounds minor, but it sheared off the tail section, a wing, catastrophic damage. But then the main fuselage, where most people were, actually slid down a glacier.
Wow, how far?
The sources say an incredible 700 meters, almost half a mile.
That slide. Horrific, but maybe it cushioned the final impact.
It's a grim calculation, isn't it? But yes, perhaps it prevented total obliteration. Still, the cockpit was completely crushed on that initial impact. The pilots died instantly.
So immediate chaos, destruction, and then just isolation, high in the Andes.
Utter isolation. Inhospitable doesn't even begin to cover it.
Let's talk about who survived that initial crash. It's frankly amazing anyone did.
It really is. Out of the 45 people on board, 33 initially survived the impact in that terrifying slide.
33. But the Andes weren't done with them, were they, that first night?
No. The first night was brutal. The cold was extreme. Many were badly injured, and they had almost no shelter inside the broken fuselage. 5 more people died that first night.
So down to 28. Just like that, facing the elements, trauma.
And this is where you see incredible human response almost immediately. The sources really highlight 2 individuals, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino.
They were medical students, right?
Yes, just young students. But they basically became the trauma team on the spot, treating fractures, wounds, with virtually nothing. No proper supplies, no painkillers to speak of.
Just sheer will and basic knowledge?
Exactly. They're quick thinking, setting bones, cleaning wounds as best they could. It was crucial for keeping those remaining 28 alive through those first critical hours and days.
But even with that immediate medical effort, hope was pinned on rescue, wasn't it?
Of course. They assumed, that help was on the way, search planes were launched.
But there was a huge problem.
A massive problem. The plane's fuselage was white. The mountainside was covered in snow. They were practically invisible from the air.
So the searches, they found nothing.
Nothing. And after just 8 days, on October 21st, the official search and rescue operations were called off. The authorities presumed them lost.
8 days. It's incredibly fast to give up hope. Did the survivors know?
Not immediately. But then came maybe the most crushing psychological blow. It was 11 days after the crash.
How did they find out?
One of the survivors, Roy Harley, managed an incredible feat. He repaired a small transistor radio they'd found in the wreckage.
Wow. Resourceful.
Incredibly. And then they heard it. Huddled in that freezing fuselage, listening to this tiny radio. They heard the news bulletin. The search was over. They'd been given up for dead.
I can't even begin to imagine the feeling, that moment, hearing that.
It must have been utterly shattering, the realization that nobody was coming.
Yeah.
That's the moment, that switches everything. They weren't waiting for rescue anymore. Survival was entirely up to them.
And the reality of their situation was just bleak. Where were they exactly?
Stranded at about 3,800 meters altitude. That's nearly 12,500 feet. There's nothing there, no plants, no animals, just rocks, snow, and ice.
And the food they had on the plane.
Tiny amounts, some chocolate bars, a few jars of jam, some wine. The sources say it was gone within days, maybe a week at most. They were facing starvation.
Which leads to the hardest part of this story.
Yeah.
The decision they had to make.
Yes. The unthinkable decision. With absolutely no other food source, they realized the only way to survive was to use the bodies of those who had died.
The sources are clear. This wasn't taken lightly.
Not at all. It was agonizing. There were intense debates, deep moral and religious objections. They were mostly devout Catholics.
How did they reconcile it?
It involved framing it as a kind of pact, a sacrifice, almost like communion, allowing others to live. A group consensus had to be reached. But even then, taking that first step...
Someone had to be first.
Yes. The sources indicate it was Roberto Canessa, the medical student. He showed a kind of brutal pragmatism, understanding it was absolutely necessary. It was an act of survival, plain and simple, documented as necessary to prevent starvation.
Just as they're grappling with this impossible choice, the mountain strikes again.
Yes, nature was relentless. On October 29th, about 16 days after the crash, a huge avalanche hit them.
Hit the fuselage, where they were sheltering.
Exactly. It buried the fuselage in snow, trapping them inside. 8 more people died in that avalanche.
8 more. The numbers just keep dropping. How many were left then?
Only 19. After the crash, the first night, now the avalanche. Just 19 souls remaining.
That must have been terrifying, but maybe galvanizing too. Like, we cannot stay here.
Absolutely. It seems to have solidified the decision. Staying put meant certain death. They had to find a way out themselves. This spurred the plan for the expedition.
The trek. Who did they choose to go?
They selected 3 they felt were the strongest, the most capable of making the journey. Fernando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, him again, and Antonio Vizintin.
But walking out wasn't simple. The cold alone. What were the nights like?
Brutally cold. Temperatures dropped to around a negative 30 degrees Celsius at night, minus 22 Fahrenheit. You can't survive that exposed.
So they needed gear they didn't have.
Right, and this is another point of incredible ingenuity. They realized they needed protection against the night cold for the trek, so they started working on something remarkable.
What was it?
A sleeping bag. But not just any sleeping bag. They took insulation from the plane's tail section, which had landed nearby, clothes from the deceased, anything they could find, and painstakingly stitched it all together.
Into one large sleeping bag.
Yes, big enough for the trekkers. It was an immense effort, sewing in the freezing cold with improvised needles and thread. But that sleeping bag was absolutely critical. It's probably what made the trek possible at all.
Okay, so they have the team, they have the sleeping bag. When did they finally set out?
On December 12th. Think about that. It's 2 full months after the crash. 60 days living in those conditions.
2 months. Incredible.
Yeah.
And they headed west, hoping to reach Chile.
That was the plan. But the Andes are just vast, much bigger than they anticipated.
How did the trek go initially with the 3 of them?
It was incredibly difficult, climbing steep slopes, deep snow, freezing nights even with the sleeping bag. After just 4 days, they realized something crucial.
What was that?
They didn't have enough food to sustain all 3 of them for the journey ahead. It was much longer than they'd hoped.
Oh no, so what do they do?
Vizintin made a huge sacrifice. He agreed to turn back to the crash site, leaving his share of the meager rations for Parrado and Canessa.
So he went back. That must have been devastating for him too.
For everyone. But it gave the other 2 a slightly better chance. So now it was just Parrado and Canessa.
2 men against the Andes. How long did they keep going?
They pushed on relentlessly. The sources often describe Parrado as being driven by an incredible will, maybe fueled by the loss of his mother and sister in the crash.
He just wouldn't stop.
He wouldn't. They kept going for another 10 days after Vizintin turned back. 10 grueling days. They covered about 61 kilometers, or roughly 38 miles.
Across that terrain. It's almost unbelievable. Did they finally see signs of civilization?
Yes. Eventually, they started descending. They saw signs of vegetation, a river, and then people.
The moment of contact. When was that?
December 20th. They reached a river too wide and fast to cross. And on the other side, they saw a man on horseback, a Chilean farmer named Sergio Catalan.
How did they communicate across the river?
It's an iconic image from the story. Parrado tied a note explaining who they were to a rock and threw it across the river. Catalan got the message. Help was finally coming.
So 68 days after the crash, they make contact. What happened next? The rescue.
Catalan rode for hours to get help. The authorities were alerted. Helicopters were dispatched the next day, but bad weather delayed the main rescue. Parrado was crucial here. He actually flew back with the first helicopter to guide them to the crash site.
He went back again.
Yes, to guide the rescue. The final rescue happened on December 2010, 1972, exactly 70 days after the crash.
70 days. And how many were finally rescued from the site?
In total, 16 survivors were rescued. They were suffering terribly from starvation, dehydration, frostbite, but they were alive.
16 out of 45. It's just an astounding story of survival against all odds. When you look back at the sources, what are the main things that stand out about how they survived?
Well, several things. The sheer psychological resilience is one. Hearing you're abandoned and choosing to fight anyway. the difficult, moral negotiation required to make the choices they did in an environment with zero resources.
And the ingenuity.
Absolutely. The medical students, Knessa and Zerbino, acting immediately, Roy Harley fixing that radio, which was so pivotal, and the collective effort to create something like that sleeping bag, it's resourcefulness born of utter necessity.
So this deep dive really shows you it wasn't just luck or a miracle in the divine sense. It was this incredible activation of human capacity, endurance, decision-making, teamwork when everything else falls away.
Right. Society stripped bare, and they built a new micro-society focused purely on survival.
Which leaves us with maybe one last thought for you, the listener, to ponder.
Yeah, think about the individuals we've named. Knessa, Parado, Harley, Zerbino, Vizintin. The ones who often had to take the lead, make the first move, whether it was medical, technical, or that incredibly difficult first step regarding food, or the decision to trek out.
The burden of leadership.
Exactly. In a situation with literally zero resources, how does that leadership responsibility fall on certain shoulders? And maybe more profoundly, how do those individuals ever truly process the weight of the actions they had to take to ensure the survival of the group? That, I think, is the deeper echo of those 70 days in the Andes.